2024 real estate year is off to the races, and we're already seeing and feeling a noticeable uptick in activity levels and interest just since the first of the year, both within our team, ourselves, and definitely our colleagues within the industry, both on the sales side, mortgage side, and the inspectors, of course, as well. And the thing is, too, there's a palatable level of optimism in the marketplace that we have not seen or felt in about a year. People were just done with real estate for at least the latter half of 2023. And now the conversations are quite different. But why is that? What's different? Well, let's start off with the BOC, because we've got an update where markets expectations for the 2024 Bank of Canada rates, well, they're getting a little bit more exciting if you're on sort of the mortgage side of things. Projections still have the first rate cut, most likely at the March meeting. Where they expect then in April they're going to hold, and then there's going to be further cuts through the summer. And the markets are now expecting an overnight rate at the end of 2024 to be at 3.5%. Just last month, those same predictions were 3.75, and back in November, it was 4.25. So you're seeing the expectations and the rate of cuts increasing as time moves forward here. These predictions are shifting and becoming a little bit more optimistic if you're on that side of the fence, of course, based on what's happening in the economy. And we've got these massive increasing debt loads. We've got consumers that are feeling the pinch further and further. And of course, the numbers that we shared with the business insolvencies and their debt loads just a couple episodes ago really speak to the stresses throughout the economy. We're seeing a much lower number in job vacancies. And while the jobs market is currently rather steady, I think we're going to see that shift as well, especially when the January numbers come out based on all the part-time jobs that are going to disappear over the holiday season here. Now, no one today is really expecting a rate cut in January, but for fun, keep your eye on January the 24th, because that's when the BOC meets next. Again, it would come as a surprise, but don't get your hopes up. That's not trending that way yet. But hey, the reason being, the Bank of Canada still, of course, needs the rate of inflation to drop further before their confidence in rate cuts can really come to the surface here. So keep in mind, inflation announcements come on the third Tuesday of every month, making the next announcement on January the 16th. So a couple of key dates there to keep an eye on just this month alone.
Yeah, and let's keep an eye on mortgage rates too, because fixed mortgage rates, they continue to drift lower, and that's a great forward-looking indicator as to what could come next. So we're even seeing deep discounted rates right now at the 5.2% range, with insured mortgages well below the 5% range here. It still looks like there's an additional 50 basis points to come off fixed rate mortgages as they realign with bond yields that have come down 90 basis points since the October highs. The idea of potentially lower interest rates has definitely increased real estate sentiment. And we know from tracking real estate sentiment over the last 3 years that this will lead to an increase in sales volume, and potentially even more so if rates get far more aggressive. To give you some context here, the Real Estate Confidence Index has risen from 37 to 45 in 8 months. And that's that palpable change that Dan was alluding to earlier. So while sentiment and sales may rise, and I do believe that will be the case for part of 2024, buyers will still face higher than long-term average interest rates, which will temper any COVID-style buying that we saw and likely temper prices to some degree. But even at 4% mortgage rates, payments would still be 60% higher than they were in 2021. So still some payment shock coming for those renewing, although hopefully we can get those rates down by the time that takes place by late 24, early 25.
Sentiment really does play such a driver here. And through the latter half of 2023, we kept talking about how sentiment was dropping, getting lower and lower, and prices and sales volumes followed with it. So it really does dictate the way people feel about the real estate market. Really dictates where you can kind of expect prices and sales volumes to go. It's such a strong metric, so we keep a close eye on that one. We also keep a close eye on Toronto. Toronto's been a very unique market to watch this year, especially because they ended their year and we know how big Toronto is, they ended their year with only 66,000 homes sold total. That is the lowest sales volumes count in 23 years, dating back to the year 2000. And what else was going on in the year 2000? There were 22% less people, 500,000 less people, and yet they're seeing similar sales volumes. And as a further reference, there are currently 73,000 licensed realtors in Toronto. Okay, do that math. 73,000 realtors, 66,000 homes sold. Pretty simple math to figure out that it's a very tough industry to be in if you're an agent in Toronto for at least the last 12 months. Now, leading up to the end of 2023, home sales were lower year over year every month for the last 6 months. But then, very oddly, in December, the sales spiked like 21%, the largest increase that region saw in 8 months. Is that kind of a look as to what's to come? Well, time will tell, of course, because 1 month does not make a trend by any stretch. The real story, and this is very similar to what we're seeing in Vancouver, is of course in inventory, because there was a notable development in that space in December, because new listings in Toronto fell 13% month over month, somewhat similar to Vancouver, but that there was the largest decline in month over month listings since February, and the second lowest reading for any December in the past 20 years. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, it's December, of course less people are listing. You're looking at a 20-year low. That dramatic of a change in sales versus listings, it shot the sales to listings ratio way up from 38 to 53 in a single month. Again, the largest jump seen in like 3 years. So something really dramatic has happened in Toronto there. Again, is it an anomaly? Well, we'll find out by the end of this month and of course moving forward. Overall inventory over there, it's 20% higher than this time last year. So we'll see where the sort of like increase in sales, increase in inventory, decrease in listings factors take precedent here, or see where they take prices rather over the upcoming months. But speaking of prices, Toronto dropped about 1.3% in price, looking at their HPI last month over month, and they're down 15% from those record highs seen about 2 years ago. So place your bets on when you're going to see prices, or where you're going to see prices go in Toronto coming in 2024, but a dramatically different marketplace than Vancouver. The two have completely diverged in about the last year here, where if you remember, I think Vancouver is currently sitting about 7% under those all-time highs. Toronto is more than double that at 15% off.
Wondering if we saw a dramatic increase in sales in December because of that new municipal tax that's coming in at the start of January. And I wonder if there was a number of buyers and sellers who had agreed to move their contract dates up to avoid having to pay that tax. It's definitely a possibility. 1 month doesn't make a trend, as we often say, right? So we'll definitely need to keep an eye on that. But I definitely think, when you've got municipal taxes that are increasing at the incredible rate that they are in Toronto, that's going to put a lot of buyers on the sideline too. It's just going to make it
expand
harder.
on that. How much more are people looking to pay once that's enacted?
I think it was something like it's an additional 10% of its municipal taxes. It's something crazy that's going through. I don't have the information in front of me, Dan, but I do know that, where we pay a property transfer tax every time a property is purchased, we pay that to the province. However, in Toronto, they're now paying a provincial transfer tax and they're paying a municipal transfer tax. So they're doubling up on the taxes there. And from what I understood from speaking to Marita, she's a Toronto realtor who was on our podcast earlier in 2023, she mentioned her brokerage saw an incredible amount of deals that were getting pushed forward into December to avoid having to pay those taxes in January. Because I know that the municipality said even if you had done a deal prior to January, or if it was going to close in January, close in February, that those would apply even if you had done your deal prior to the announcement. So, not very fair in many ways, and likely why a lot of people accelerate in December. So
Yeah, very true. I think you're dead on. I just pulled it up here for a quick reference here, and it's kind of like our transfer tax here. It does scale up based on property price. The higher you go, the more you pay. But let's say they've got, well, I think their average price is about 1.15 now in Toronto. Let's use $1 million just as a round easy number here. The new additional transfer tax there at the municipal level would equate to 2%. So on $1 million purchase, on top of your other taxation, you're getting another $20,000 bill, which I'm certain will be a cash payment. You can't roll that into your mortgage.
oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
just making it way harder for people to buy and making it. I'm sorry, but again, we're talking about affordability in a city that has almost none. And how does that create affordability? Why are we introducing another tax? I don't get it.
Yeah, this will push their tax rate on a brand new home upwards of 36% now.
Yeah.
More than a third of a new home is now going to tax
Yeah. Well,
and fees, but yes.
yeah. So pretty dramatic in what's happening in Toronto, and likely a case for why we saw those sales numbers jump in December, likely because a lot of people are trying to avoid having to pay that tax. So again, we'll see probably a depressed or more depressed market as it becomes more difficult for people in Toronto to buy homes. It's just less affordable. So
if they can't buy, where are they going?
they're going to rent, right? And so let's talk about rentals. The December numbers are out. So asking rents for all residential property types in Canada averaged $2,174 in November, holding close to the record high of October, which was $2,178. So within a 0.2% month over month decrease, a nominal decrease here. Vancouver still leads the pack with one beds at $2,866 a month and two bedrooms at a whopping $3,834 a month, both up 6% year over year. What's shocking to me, though, is Burnaby saw a whopping 15% year over year increase in rates and sits at the second most expensive rental market in Canada. Toronto is basically flat from 1 year ago, with one beds having dropped about 2% and two beds up about 1.5%. But it's around $200 a month on average lower from the recent peak. The largest drop in year over year one bedroom rents was in Guelph, Ontario, dropping a mere 2.3%. So some crazy numbers there, Dan, in terms of rents. And I think if we touch on a little bit of immigration issues here, we'll have an idea of where they're going too.
It's very possible. Yeah, it's almost like Toronto's seen sort of peak affordability with that rental rate. As Ryan just mentioned, it's for about 4, 5, 6 months here. Rents have come down $200 on average. We'll see how far that goes because, of course, people can only afford so much. And then if home prices come down like 15%, as they have in Toronto, all of a sudden your monthly outlay starts to make more sense for some to put it into ownership. So we'll see if that converges or diverges further. But yes, immigration is something, it's been the hot topic really of 2022 to today. The most recent numbers showed 1.2 million people coming into the country in the last 12 months, obviously helping push that rental problem and to hit those rates at all-time highs last year. Homes, like resale homes here, as we know, prices are quite elevated, at least from 2 years ago, and inventory remains incredibly low. You look to GVRD today, and there's only, 8,500 homes available for sale right now. And yes, it's January, it's a lower month, but 8,500, that's low. The stresses on the real estate have been in the forefront for about a year here, but now we're hearing the other stories, right? Typically in healthcare right now, we're just this week in Vancouver, or in BC rather, the number of patients in hospital beds hit an all-time high. The number was somewhere around 10,500. And, I'm not sure if you've had an experience, Ryan, but if you walked into a hospital with a non-life-threatening emergency, but you need to see someone, typical wait times are upwards of 8 hours. 8 hours to see a doctor. You roll in at 8 p.m. with a problem, you're not seeing anyone until 4 or 5 a.m. And so we're going to see, should obviously the infrastructure for this type of population growth just is not there, right? The housing was first affected, understandably. Now it's going through and filtering to the healthcare system. We're starting to hear more and more nightmare stories about how congested the schools are getting. So this is going to continue as well. And you got to think, healthcare, schools, these don't have quick fixes either. It's similar to the housing market, right? You can't just go and build 1 million homes in a couple months here. You can't build 50 new schools. You can't build 10 new hospitals. So these issues here are making the country, BC, Vancouver, in a sense, less desirable. And that was definitely noted again in our recent past podcast where we talked about how many people are leaving the province and leaving the country. Obviously, the numbers coming in are far, far higher, but I expect these stresses to be front and center through the news cycle for most of 2024.
Yeah, especially I think that the next sort of segment, like you said, the education system, the schools, that's certainly a big part of our I guess defined problem, and not just elementary and high schools and things like that. Like we've talked about previously, the international students and the amount of people that are coming here from around the world to get their diplomas or get their degrees, again, is causing a lot of stress on the rental side of things as well. So we'll see where it goes in 2024. We'll see if the government really starts to clamp down on it or not, but it's a tale to see. With that said, I just want to touch on this last piece here, because if you live in BC, your BC property assessments are out. And while we take this metric with a grain of salt, a couple interesting notes that the Crown Corp has reported. So I'll just list off a couple numbers here because it's quite interesting. The vast majority of markets in Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Okanagan saw a typical 2024 valuation of a single-family home stay within 5%, so up or down 5%, increase or decrease in price here. The assessed value of a single-family home in Vancouver rose on average by 4% to just above $2.2 million, while strata properties remain nearly unchanged at $807,000. A notable thing, too, no communities in the Okanagan or Greater Victoria surpassed 5% in growth. Although you got to think, if you were to just allow prices to go up or down 5% every year, within 15 years, prices would have fallen in half or doubled. So it's not a tiny effect. 5% shouldn't be overlooked. It's just that, your pre-pandemic or your pandemic era of price surging was so dramatic that 5% feels small, but it's not. It's actually huge. In fact, Thomas Davidoff, associate prof at Sauder School of Business, was quoted saying that, given the challenges with inflation and rising cost of living since 2022, the fact that property values are holding or even increasing slightly is evidence that BC homeowners are holding on to their homes and making adjustments elsewhere in their lives to make ends meet. It also means that when situations become more favorable, prices could resume that upward trend, though much like we've talked about in today's podcast, not at the same pandemic rates we've seen before. So lastly, I think one thing to talk about here is the Crown Corp performs your BC assessed values in July of every year, and then they're released 6 months later. So the data you're getting from your assessed value is typically very latent. It's a lagging indicator of prices. It doesn't really, it's not a forward-looking metric. So take it with a grain of salt. Comparatively speaking here, HPI average prices here are already down 3.5% since those numbers came out. So not something you really want to use to value your property if you're going to market or you're going to sell. It's just it's one piece of the puzzle that we got. So last point too, if you don't agree with your assessment, you can challenge it, but go to the BC Assessment Authority.
Yeah, I'll share my assessment dropped about 3%, but what went up? My property tax bill. It's
good.
obviously, property taxes are up 7+% this year. So a bit of a myth that, hey, if your property price lowers, that your property tax lowers. Well, no, because they're adjusting mill rates and they're adjusting the overall increases as well. So this general outlook there. Just recognize that dropping home prices as far as the assessment goes doesn't necessarily mean you're saving on your tax bill each year.
And I will say too, Dan, to follow that up, Dan and I live very close to each other, within walking distance. Very similar housing types as well. And oddly, mine went up by 5%, and we're 3 blocks apart from each other. So again, factor that in.
Not an easy thing to do, assessing millions of homes. As you may have heard on earlier podcasts, we had one of our team members actually used to work for BC Assessment for many years, and we got some great inside information into how they operate. And the amount of homes that a single person is responsible for assessing is on the verge of astronomical. So no doubt that it's very hard to kind of nail down and pinpoint every single one of them. So like Ryan mentioned, if you are shocked by your assessment to the upside or to the downside, you do have, oh my goodness, I forgot the time frame. Is it 3 months? You do have some time to go into and have it looked at, and you can challenge that number.
Alternatively, too, you can always reach out, book a call with us, and figure out what your home's worth. It's probably the best way to do it.
Great place to end it. Thanks, as always, for tuning in, listening. Have a great week, and we will see you here again next week.